This is part 2 of my video on James Joyce's Ulysses. If you haven't seen part 1, that's fine actually. But if you want to watch it and you haven't, then I'll put a link in the description. So we left off about halfway through the quotes that I've chosen to talk about. Quotes that mostly I just enjoyed, found beautiful or moving in some way. But okay, so the one person who watches all my videos, they came to me after they watched the last one and they said, why didn't you talk about the Odyssey? The comparison, because Ulysses, I might have mentioned, I don't think I did actually. Ulysses is loosely structured off of the plot of the Odyssey, like Homer's Odyssey, the Greek epic. And so they said, why didn't you talk about it? It's called Ulysses. Ulysses is just the anglicization of Odysseus. They didn't say this, but it's apparently a big part of the book. Why didn't you talk about it? And my response was just that when I read it, I didn't really find my understanding of the Odyssey to be very relevant to working with the text. I found all the when I was reading a chapter summary after each one, because I had to do that, it's kind of hard to get the gist of things sometimes, but I would read the chapter summary and it would include, the name of the chapter, which was the name of episode from the Odyssey, and it would say how it's related to that, what's the comparison, and I'd be like, okay, that's kind of tenuous. I don't know if I really see the value in that, but this person, again, they watched the video, they're like, why didn't you talk about it? I was like, I didn't really care about it, but I thought about it some more. I looked some more into it, and I think I was wrong not to care about the Odyssey comparison or the Odyssey parallels. Basically, the Odyssey is this, again, huge epic journey of a hero, Odysseus, doing a big journey, traveling, fighting monsters, and getting lost, and just going all through all these trials and tribulations, and it's about him making his way back home to his wife Penelope, his faithful wife, and he finds a bunch of suitors and kills them. So basically, just a huge epic story of a hero. And so I think by comparing the main character of Ulysses, Leopold Bloom, with Odysseus, it's meant to be ironic. The Scylla and Charybdis chapter, Scylla. Anyway, Scylla and Charybdis in the Odyssey are two big sea monsters that nearly kill Odysseus and his crew. And the chapter that's named after that is, if I remember correctly, Leopold Bloom in his office, getting lost in a big conversation with all his coworkers, and lost in rhetoric and whatever argument. And by comparing an office argument to giant sea monsters, I think you can have one of two things happen. The first that may happen is that it may, the irony of it may make Bloom seem kind of pathetic. Like, oh, okay, well, his workplace argument is, I guess he can't, it's too big for him. He's not very brave or heroic if this is his sea monster, right? And so you can kind of laugh at the comparison and say, wow, what a pathetic stand-in for a hero we have here. I think the other thing that could happen if you sympathize with Bloom is that comparison kind of speaks to the narrativization of our own lives, the ways in which little problems seem very big. To some people, an office argument is, if you have social anxiety or if you feel outcast among your coworkers, right, it can be a big thing. And the main storyline too, where again you have Odysseus traveling miles and miles to get back to his wife, facing all these challenges, and then in Ulysses you have Bloom kind of walking around the city, and his wife is at home having an affair. Again, the comparison can serve to make him seem really pitiful, or it can, I think, endear you to him, make him seem like, okay, yeah, I mean, everyone is kind of the hero of their own story, and we're all dealing with things, and some of them can feel as big as fighting a sea monster, or having people try to murder you when you come home to your wife. It's, in the Ulysses, he's just dealing with the fact that his wife is having an affair on him. So, yeah, I do think it actually adds a lot to the reading of the text. And so, to my viewer, thank you for bringing that back up to me, and encouraging me to think some more about it. So, I'm going to move on now. I'm going to get into the quotes, the rest of the quotes that I've chosen. And yeah, I hope you enjoy. So I already know this one. This is one of the ones that I think may have led to the obscenity claims that almost got this book permanently banned from being published in the U.S. It's not that bad. It's weird. It's intimate. It's an intimate moment between Bloom and his wife, back when they were first kind of courting, or maybe when they were first married. So I'm going to skip over some of the spicier parts because I don't want to get in trouble. And this is a family-friendly channel, right? If your kid's reading Ulysses, I want them to be able to watch this video. Okay, so I'll just read it and, like I said, skip over some of the less appropriate parts. Glowing wine on his palate lingered, swallowed. Crushing in the wine-press grapes of Burgundy, sun's heat it is, seems to a secret touch telling me memory. Touched his sense moistened remembered, hidden under wild ferns on Howth. Below us, bay, sleeping sky, no sound, the sky, the bay purple by the Lion's Head, green by Drumlick, yellow-green towards Sutton. Fields of undersea, the lines faint brown in grass, buried cities. Pillowed on my coat she had her hair, earwigs in the heather scrub, my hand under her nape, you'll toss me all. Oh, wonder! Cool soft with ointments, her hand touched me, caressed. Her eyes upon me did not turn away. Moving over this here. Flowers her eyes were, take me, willing eyes. Pebbles fell, she lay still. A goat, no one. High on Ben Howth rhododendrons, a nanny goat walking sure-footed, dropping currants. Screened under ferns, she laughed, warm-folded. Wildly I lay on her, kissed her, eyes, her lips, her stretched neck, beating. Me and me now. By this point, again, if you watched my other video, you should know that I'm just in love with the imagery that Joyce is able to conjure. Just so tactile. You can smell the smells and see things, and it's such an intimate moment, and it's written so intimately. It feels like you shouldn't be seeing this, but we're in Bloom's head, and so we're seeing what he's thinking. Obviously, it's also very sad. He's remembering this really intimate, beautiful moment. And the last sentence there is me and me now, comparing that version of him laying with his wife, making love in the grass, to the him now that he doesn't seem to be proud of. He seems like, the fact that he doesn't say me then and me now, right? That would imply an equality between the two versions. But I think the fact that he says just me, right? Me and me now. I think the fact that it just says me implies that he feels that was the truest version of himself. He felt whole in that moment, and he doesn't feel whole now. And it's very understandable, obviously, because of what he's going through. Knowing his wife is at home, being unfaithful to him. Yeah, just a really beautiful passage. Okay, so this is a conversation with Stephen, our other main character, and he's arguing with some people about his Hamlet theory, his theory about Shakespeare's Hamlet, that Hamlet is a representation of Shakespeare's son, not Shakespeare himself, and that Shakespeare is the father, the ghost of the father in Hamlet. That's his theory, and so it's a big, long conversation. But this is a quote from it. As we, or Mother Dana, weave and unweave our bodies, Stephen said, from day to day, their molecules shuttled to and fro, so does the artist weave and unweave his image. And as the mole on my right breast is where it was when I was born, though all my body has been woven of new stuff time after time, so through the ghost of the unquiet father, the image of the unliving son looks forth. In the intense instant of imagination, when the mind, Shelley says, is a fading coal, that which I was is that which I am, and that which in possibility I may come to be. So in the future, the sister of the past, I may see myself as I sit here now, by reflection from that which I then shall be. So, I mean, he's talking about identity and the self here. We know that the molecules and the cells in our bodies are being remade all the time. There's that factoid that, every 7 years your body totally replaces all its cells. I think that's not exactly true. I think it's an overgeneralization, but the idea is true, right? That we're always being remade physically and emotionally and mentally as well, right? The mindset you're in right now is not the mindset you were in probably even 5 minutes ago. So it's Stephen here is affirming the self as an ever-changing entity, not just this static idea of a thing, which a lot of people, I think, have of themselves, right? People like to think certain things about themselves, or even of other people, right? This person is this way. And Stephen here is saying, we can't say that, because although there are things that make us ourselves, right? He says the mole on his left breast is the same place that it was when he was born. He's constantly being remade, just as Shakespeare was remaking himself over the course of his life. It's a really interesting conversation. A lot of it goes over my head. I still have not read most of Shakespeare, and when I read Hamlet I was in high school. But I am going to get there eventually. It's a bit daunting, but I finished reading Ulysses, so I think I can do it. All right, moving on. Same conversation here. This is still Stephen talking. It says, if Socrates leave his house today, he will find the sage seated on his doorsteps. If Judas go forth, tonight it is to Judas his steps will tend. Every life is many days, day after day. We walk through ourselves, meeting robbers, ghosts, giants, old men, young men, wives, widows, brothers in love, but always meeting ourselves. Just when the playwright who wrote the folio of this world wrote it badly. He gave us the light first and the sun 2 days later. So he's talking about God there, inconsistencies he finds in the Bible, right? Let there be light, he makes light, and then the sun doesn't come till 2 days later. Stephen is always kind of picking things apart. But again, this is talking about identity and the self. And he talks about this idea that you find yourself in everybody you meet. Well, there's several things going on here, so let me talk about one thing at a time. You find yourself in everybody you meet, and he compares that to Shakespeare writing these characters, where in every single character that he writes, there was necessarily a piece of him within there. And in the same way, there's this spiritual idea that all consciousnesses are the same, and that everybody you meet is a version of yourself. In Catholic thought, that would be kind of the Holy Spirit, the presence of God in every person. In other philosophies, it would be the reincarnation. So the other thing, the way it starts, if Socrates leaves his house today, you will find the sage seated on his doorsteps. I think that points to the fact that no matter how you feel about yourself, you're always going to be stuck with yourself. Harold Bloom, who oddly hasn't nothing to do with this book, even though he shares a last name with the protagonist. He was a literary critic, and while talking about the value of literature, he said, at the end of the day, we are all of us alone. And I find that idea very compelling. It's sad in a way, but also reaffirming. You're always going to have yourself. And when you leave your house, you're going to come back to find yourself at home, right? You are always where you are, if that makes sense. It seems circular, but it's again an affirmation that you have to be happy with yourself in order to be happy with life, because there's no getting rid of yourself and continuing to live. So here Bloom is. He's in a bar listening to some guys sing. Simon Dedalus is Stephen's father, and he apparently has a great voice. So Simon is singing, and Bloom is just listening. And this passage is just very rhythmic and beautiful, and speaks to the bonding force of music for people. So I'll go ahead with it. Brain-tipped, cheek-touched with flame, they listened, feeling that flow, endearing flow over skin, limbs, human heart, soul, spine. Bloom signed to Pat. Bald Pat is a waiter hard of hearing, to set ajar the door of the bar. The door of the bar. So, that will do. Pat, waiter, waited, waiting to hear, for he was hard of hear by the door. Sorrow from me seemed to depart. Through the hush of air a voice sang to them, low, not rain, not leaves and murmur, like no voice of strings or reeds, or what do you call them, dulcimers, touching their still ears with words, still hearts of their each his remembered lives. Good, good to hear. Sorrow from them each seemed to from both depart when first they heard, when first they saw, lost Richie, Poldy, mercy of beauty, heard from a person wouldn't expect it in the least, her first merciful, love-soft, oft-loved word. Love that is singing, love's old sweet song. Bloom unwound slowly the elastic band of his packet. Love's old sweet sonnet la gold. Bloom wound a skein round 4 fork fingers, stretched it, relaxed, and wound it round his troubled double, 4-fold and octave, gived them fast, full of hope and all delighted. Yeah, again, the rhythm here is immaculate. It's just so, I find it spellbinding. I don't know that I ever used the word spellbinding in real life, but passages like this, they just catch me and don't let me go. So just, this kind of tumbling feeling, right? They listened, feeling that flow, endearing flow over skin, limbs, human heart, soul, spine. I mean, the basic fact of what's happening here is there is a man singing, and his friends are listening, and they all feel warm and remember times in their lives that the song reminds them of. But the way it's written, right here, a voice sang to them, low, not rain, not leaves and murmur, like no voice of strings or reeds, or what do you call them, dulcimers. I love he's defining the human voice by what it's not, right? It's not rain, it's not leaves and murmur, it's not an instrument that we've created with our hands. It's something else entirely. And by defining it by what it's not, he seems to imply that there is something special about the human voice, and I think there is. It's just it's so beautifully done. Right here, they lost Richie Poldy. Richie is one of the characters. Poldy is Leopold's nickname. Right there, they lose themselves. They kind of become one for this music. It's really, really beautiful. Okay, so this is a scene where Bloom's sitting on a beach, and there's some young women also at the beach. And the chapter before this just ended with a man at the bar yelling at Bloom, insulting him for being Jewish. And all throughout the book so far, we've had really negative views of Bloom. People are not very kind to him. People don't really let him in the same way that the other friends are in. I mean, he has a group of friends, but he's not really one of them. And so we've gotten a lot of negatives about Bloom, but this passage kind of gives another perspective. Yes, it was her he was looking at, and there was meaning in his look. His eyes burned into her as though they would search her through and through, read her very soul. Wonderful eyes they were, superbly expressive. But could you trust them? People were so queer. She could see at once by his dark eyes and his pale intellectual face that he was a foreigner, the image of the photo she had of Martin Harvey, the matinee idol, only for the mustache, which she preferred because she wasn't stage-struck like Winnie Rippingham, that wanted they two to always dress the same on account of a play, but she could not see whether he had an aquiline nose or a slightly retroussé from where he was sitting. He was in deep mourning, she could see that, and the story of a haunting sorrow was written on his face. She would have given worlds to know what it was. He was looking up so intently, so still, and he saw her kick the ball, and perhaps he could see the bright steel buckles of her shoes if she swung them like that, thoughtfully with the toes down. So here you have this young woman who sees Bloom as an object of desire, the kind of mysterious stranger. And it's nice because, we haven't been able to, no one that in this book has so far seen Bloom in a positive light, like I said. And so we kind of feel for him, and it's like, oh, someone is finally seeing him as beautiful and as desirable, someone she wants to know more about, right? She would have given worlds to know what it was. But you also have the reality of the situation, which is that he's a much older man, she's much younger. It doesn't actually say their age. I guessed they were probably 17 or 18, and so you have this kind of uncomfortable situation where this positive view of Bloom is presented from what I interpret to be an underage girl, and this chapter ends with her like showing her stockings off, and it's heavily implied that he pleasures himself on the beach to this girl in her stockings. And so again, we have this, what Joyce loves to do is present or maybe even foreshadow a touching moment and then kind of bring us back down to reality, right? So we have all these negative views of Bloom that we know are not true, right? They oversimplify him. They see him as an outsider. And then we have this view, this overly romantic view of Bloom, which we also know is unfortunately not true. It's a very uncomfortable scene, like I said, but I don't know. It's hard to know what to think about it. Yeah. If you have anything to say, look, the one person who watches my video, if you have something to say about this, I want to know. I'm curious. My number one fan. Okay. Same scene. He's still on the beach. Again, more of this just really nice, rhythmic, choppy prose. Bah, what is that flying about? Swallow? Bat, probably. Thinks I'm a tree so blind. Have birds no smell? Metempsychosis. They believe you could be changed into a tree from grief. Weeping willow. Bah, there he goes. Funny little beggar. Wonder where he lives. Belfry up there. Very likely. Hanging by his heels in the odor of sanctity. Bell scared him out, I suppose. Mass seems to be over. Could hear them all at it. Pray for us, and pray for us, and pray for us. Good idea, the repetition. Same thing with ads. Buy from us, and buy from us. We have more religious criticism here, right? There's a mass going on. He hears the chanting, Bloom does, and he, as an advertising man, right? He works in advertising, and he's also not religious, right? He, in my last video, he criticized religion quite a lot, and so this one he's comparing the repetition of a church service, pray for us and pray for us and pray for us, to the repetition of an ad, right? Both of these institutions, right, the church and advertising or capitalism or whatever you want to call it, both of them are trying to convince you that you need them in your life to be happy, right? You need God or the church. You need to show up and you need to pay tithes, and or otherwise you'll never be whole. And right, with the advertising, you have a product. This product, this is the one that'll make you feel whole. This is the one that'll complete your life and you'll finally be happy. We also have the really nice imagery of a bat flying around. Metempsychosis is a word that was brought up in the beginning of Bloom's first chapter. He's talking with his wife. It's another word for reincarnation. This idea, right? They believe you could be changed into a tree from grief. So that's just a callback to that conversation with his wife. And I think if you wanted to go a little further, you could draw a line between Bloom's kind of preoccupation with metempsychosis, with Stephen's talks about the self. Right? So the self is always changing. We go to sleep and we wake up, and are we the same person, right? How different is it to wake up the next day than it would be to be changed into an animal or a different person, right? We are different every time we wake up, and from one moment to the next. I think there's a link there. Similar thought patterns about the self and what makes the self the self. So this chapter, in the last video again I spoke about Joyce's experimentation with style. This chapter, you have a woman giving birth, and the style of the chapter, from beginning to end, represents the gestation of the human language. So it starts with like the earliest forms of English prose, and then eventually comes up to the present day, which obviously at this time was the late 1800s, early 1900s. But this is probably I'd say one of the most difficult chapters. But there's still a few things in here that I found really eye-catching and beautiful. So I'll read it and then explain some more. Therefore, every man, look to that last end that is thy death, and the dust that gripeth on every man that is born of woman. For as he came naked forth from his mother's womb, so naked shall he wend him at the last for to go as he came. The man that was come into the house then spoke to the nursing woman, and he asked her how it fared with the woman that lay there in childbed. The nursing woman answered him, and said that that woman was in throes now full 3 days, and that it would be a hard birth unneth to bear, but that now in a little it would be. She said thereto that she had seen many births of women, but never was none so hard as was that woman's birth. Then she set it forth, all to him that time was had lived nigh to that house. The man hearkened to her words, for he felt with wonder women's woe in the travail that they have of motherhood, and he wondered to look on her face, that was a young face for any man to see, but yet was she left after long years a handmaid. 9-12 blood flows chiding her childless. Again, a lot going on here. So first, you probably can see the difficulty of deciphering that certain parts of that writing. There's still some sentences I don't quite understand, but basically, Bloom enters this maternity hospital, asks how the woman's doing, and the nursing woman tells him that she's been in labor 3 days, and he thinks about how difficult it must be for women and mothers. We learned earlier in this chapter that this is this woman's 9th child, and so you can imagine the toll that must take on a woman's body. So there's a really interesting thing about this chapter, and it's that Bloom is not the only one here at this hospital. There are a lot of men sitting in this hospital, some characters that we know, and they're all, Stephen's there. They're all here ostensibly to support this woman in her childbirth. It's the wife of a friend of theirs. But all their conversations, all their jokes are about themselves. Well, they're at the expense of women. Right? Their conversations, they're talking about themselves, and they're very judgmental of women, and they make jokes about women. Bloom is the only one who seems to have any actual care for what this woman's actually going through. The man hearkened to her words, for he felt with wonder women's woe in the travail that they have of motherhood. It's this one little piece that shows us that Bloom is, by the standards of the company he keeps, more thoughtful and empathetic than most people in his circle. And this is also a commentary, I think, on the role of women as is viewed by society. Right? The nurse, it says, is a young woman, but is a handmaid. Right? And in the Bible, the handmaid is, I believe, Abraham and Sarah. Right? They can't have children, and so Abram has a child by their handmaid, Hagar, I think is her name. And so handmaid is this term for a woman who is valued only for bearing children. And says, it talks about this nursing woman. She's left after long years a handmaid. 9-12 blood flows chiding her childless. So this is a woman who has tried to have children for many years and hasn't been able to do it, and chiding her childless, right? She feels like a failure. So this whole chapter of men kind of pretending to be there for a woman and really only thinking of themselves, and the women suffering and feeling valued only for what the children they can produce, right? This woman who's on her 9th child, and then this younger woman who can't have children and feels worthless for it. It's very progressive, I think, for Joyce's time. Very empathetic. Yeah. So here, same chapter, Bloom is thinking of his own son, right? Again, in the last video we talked about how Bloom had a son that died at 11 days old, and a lot of the book is him dealing with that grief. But Sir Leopold was passing grave maugre his word, by cause he still had pity of the terror-causing shrieking of shrill women in their labour, and as he was minded of his good Lady Marian, that had borne him an only man-child, which on his 11th day on live had died, and no man of art could save so dark his destiny. And she was wondrous stricken of heart for that evil hap, and for his burial did him on a fair corslet of lamb's wool, the flower of the flock, lest he might perish utterly and lie akeeled, for it was then about the midst of the winter. And now Sir Leopold, that had of his body no man-child for an heir, looked upon him his friend's son, and was shut up in sorrow for his forepast happiness, and as sad as he was, that failed him a son of such gentle courage, for all accounted him of real parts. So grieved he also in no less measure for young Stephen, for that he lived riotously with those wastrels, and murdered his goods with whores. So we see here, right, Bloom's thinking of his son again, and he's preoccupied with the fact that he doesn't have an heir, and that'll come up again actually very soon. But he looks at Stephen now for the first time as, what could have been. Right? He starts to see Stephen in a fatherly way. And we see here, even though Bloom means well and he's in very real grief, right? He's still selfish, right? He wants an heir. He wants someone to continue his line. And then at the end we have too this kind of, I don't think Bloom is realizing it, but I think we're supposed to realize it. He thinks young Stephen is wasting his life, right? Drinking and whoring, and I think what we're supposed to get from that is that parents can oftentimes smother or suffocate their children with expectations of what they want them to be. So in Rudy's death, right, Bloom's son Rudy now exists as an ideal in his mind, right? He could have been the perfect heir. And Rudy will never have the chance to grow up and become a person of his own, so he only exists now as Bloom's fantasy of a perfect heir. If you watched my video on Blood Meridian, there's actually a passage that talks about a very similar idea, where it talks about a son losing a father, right? And not getting to know your father as a real person, only being able to see this idol, right? A perfect. They called him in that book. In that book, they say he's broken before a frozen god, right? You can never see the person as human. You only see them as this image of perfection. And so we see here that whilst Bloom is fantasizing about the heir he could have had, he is even looking at Stephen and seeing him wasting his life, and he can't really connect the two ideas. He's saddened by Stephen's state of affairs, but I don't think that he connects the idea of a real living child with the idea that they may disappoint your expectations. It's so, there's so much depth to these characters. There's no clean, easy way to define them, right? Bloom is empathetic, but he's also selfish and short-sighted, right? I think most people could actually be described that way, to some extent. Again, we have here, same chapter, Bloom thinking still about an heir. And I just want you mostly to enjoy the language here. There's some stuff to talk about, but it's really just like this kind of torrent, this flood of beautiful language and imagery. So the voices blend and fuse in clouded silence, silence that is the infinite of space. And swiftly, silently, the soul is wafted over regions of cycles of generations that have lived. A region where gray twilight ever descends, never falls on wide sage-green pasture fields, shedding her dusk, scattering a perennial dew of stars. She follows her mother with ungainly steps, a mare leading her filly foal. Twilight phantoms, are they yet molded in prophetic grace of structure? Slim, shapely haunches, a supple tendinous neck, the meek apprehensive skull. They fade, sad phantoms, all is gone. Again death is a wasteland, a home of screech owls and the sand-blind Upupa. Netaim, the golden, is no more. And on the highway of the clouds they come, muttering thunder of rebellion, the ghosts of beasts. Parallax stalks behind and goads them, the lancinating lightnings of whose brow are scorpions. Elk and yak, the bulls of Bashan and of Babylon, mammoth and mastodon, they come trooping to the sunken sea, Lacus Mortis, ominous, revengeful, zodiacal host. They moan, passing upon the clouds, horned and capricorned, the trumpeted with the tusked, the lion-maned, the giant-antlered, snouter and crawler, rodent, ruminant and pachyderm, all their moving, moaning multitude, murderers of the sun. Onward to the Dead Sea they tramp to drink, unslaked and with horrible gulpings, the salt, somnolent, inexhaustible flood, and the equine portent grows again, magnified in the deserted heavens, nay, to heaven's own magnitude, till it looms vast over the house of Virgo. And lo, wonder of metempsychosis, it is she, the everlasting bride, harbinger of the day-star, the bride ever virgin. It is she, Martha, thou lost one, Millicent the young, the dear, the radiant. How serene does she now arise, a queen among the Pleiades, in the penultimate antelucan hour, shod in sandals of bright gold, coiffed with a veil of what do you call it, gossamer. It floats, it flows about her star-born flesh, and loose it streams, emerald, sapphire, mauve, and heliotrope, sustained on currents of cold interstellar wind, winding, coiling, simply swirling, writhing in the skies of mysterious writing, till after a myriad metamorphoses of symbol it blazes, alpha, a ruby and triangled sign upon the forehead of Taurus. Yeah, a lot going on here. Again, this is in that chapter where he's tracing the development of the English language, so it's confusing and there's a lot of big words, so don't worry about getting all of it. I hope you enjoyed that just pure force of that paragraph. I love reading that. So here we're talking about still air and legacy. Bloom wants his legacy. I don't think I've actually mentioned that Bloom does have a living daughter named Millie. She's 15, I believe. And so here I think he's thinking about her, right? Millicent, the young, the dear, the radiant. But I think because here he's still so obsessed with legacy, he still just sees her as a possible path to that legacy. It talks about her being virgin, but here we have all this this imagery of legacy, of generations, cycles of generations, right? He lists living animals and extinct animals going to the Dead Sea. And on one hand, I think he's envisioning that he wants to be part of this procession. He wants his legacy to continue and join this kind of eternal cycle of generations. But I think maybe subconsciously he maybe recognizes the futility of it, right? He calls this multitude murderers of the sun. Nighttime, is the murderer of the sun. And so they bring about this kind of darkness, all these extinct animals, and there's kind of some kind of scary imagery too, where all these animals tramped through their generations eventually to die, and humans are no different, right? Both on an individual level and a species level. So I think I think it's subconscious. I don't think he really feels this way, but I think realizes at some level the futility of legacy, right? Because everybody, memory dies, everybody dies, right? One day the human race will be no more, so what's the point? But I think he goes from that darkness into the light. I think he eventually lands on having hope that Millie can continue his family line. Okay, a few more. Okay, a little context here. In that, I mentioned that scene earlier where that man yelled at Bloom and insulted him for being Jewish. And I did not say that Bloom's rejoinder to that was that Jesus was a Jew, right? Your Christ, your God was a Jew. And that enrages the man. So here we have this passage where his thoughts kind of return to that moment. He inwardly chuckled over his repartee to the blood and owned champion about his God being a Jew. people could put up with being bitten by a wolf, but what properly riled them was a bite from a sheep. The most vulnerable point, too, of tender Achilles, your god was a Jew, because mostly they appeared to imagine he came from Carrick-on-Shannon or somewhere about in the county Sligo. I think that's really funny. Yeah, so what I love this first part here, right? People can put up with being bitten by a wolf, but what properly riled them was a bite from a sheep. The man was enraged by Bloom's kind of comeback because he saw Bloom as a harmless kind of nothing, right? Just, he doesn't have a very high estimation of Jews. Excuse me. And so the fact that Bloom, someone he looks down upon, was able to get to him like that made the bite, right, even more painful. And then the second part where they appear to imagine he came out of somewhere, he came from Carrick-on-Shannon or somewhere in the county Sligo. Those are counties in Ireland where they're from. And, it's such a true idea that people imagine their God as being just like them. There's a Jesse Wells song called "The Great Caucasian God." That's actually really good. That people, the idea being that, for example, some white Christians will use God to justify bigotry. And, the fact being that Jesus was a Jew from, the Middle East. He was dark-skinned and probably had curly hair, and he was not the kind of white, blonde hair, blue-eyed image that a lot of people have of him. And we know that for a fact, but a lot of people, humorously, it says, they imagine Jesus was born in Ireland, right? That he's just like them and would frown too upon people who are not like them. Again, Bloom is very unkind towards religion in this book, and we can see a lot of reasons why. So the second to last chapter, again with the experimentation, is structured as a question and answer, almost like a Socratic dialogue. Right? What did Bloom see on the range? Blah blah blah. I marked this. I just really liked this one again. What in water did Bloom, water lover, drawer of water, water carrier, returning to the range, admire? Its universality, its democratic equality and constancy to its nature in seeking its own level, its vastness in the ocean of Mercator's projection, its unplumbed profundity in the Sundom Trench of the Pacific exceeding 8,000 fathoms, the restlessness of its waves and surface particles visiting in turn all points of its seaboard, the independence of its units, the variability of states of sea, its hydrostatic quiescence in calm, its hydrokinetic turgidity in neap and spring tides, its subsidence after devastation, its sterility in the circumpolar ice caps, Arctic and Antarctic, its climatic and commercial significance, its preponderance of 3-to-1 over the dry land of the globe, its indisputable hegemony extending in square leagues over all the region below the sub-equatorial Tropic of Capricorn, the multi-secular stability of its primeval basin, its lutivolvus bed, I don't know that word, its capacity to dissolve and hold in solution all soluble substances, including millions of tons of the most precious metals, its slow erosions of peninsulas and downward trending promontories, its alluvial deposits, its weight and volume and density. I could read that whole thing, but I think you get the idea. First of all, stylistically, it's just kind of obtuse. As a matter of principle, I guess. The idea here is that Bloom loves water for its versatility. I think that's as succinctly as I can put this very, very long paragraph. And I think that speaks to what we talked about earlier about the complexity of it, these human characters, right? And I think on a deeper level, Bloom is not loving, he does love water, but I think this is talking about humanity in all its forms, right? you know, there's such a wide range of human experiences and of states in which humans can be and of ways they can be to each other and of what they can do, right? And I think Joyce here is implying that that is something to love about humanity. Is it's just kind of, there's a better word than versatility, I think, but I can't think of it right now. Yeah, it's you can kind of see why so many people struggle to finish this book, maybe, right? There's beauty, and then it's also incredibly dense, obviously, which we talked about. But anyway, this is the last one. Again, still in this second to last chapter. I didn't mark anything in the last chapter, but here's the last quote I marked. What special affinities appeared to him to exist between the moon and woman? Her antiquity in preceding and surviving successive Tellurian generations, her nocturnal predominance, her satellitic dependence, her luminary reflection, her constancy under all her phases, rising and setting by her appointed times, waxing and waning, the forced invariability of her aspect, her indeterminate response to inaffirmative interrogation, her potency over effluent and refluent waters, her power to enamor, to mortify, to invest with beauty, to render insane, to incite to and aid delinquency, the tranquil inscrutability of her visage, the terribility of her isolated dominant, implacable, resplendent propinquity, her omens of tempest and of calm, the stimulation of her light, her motion and her presence, the admonition of her craters, her arid seas, her silence, her splendor when visible, her attraction when invisible. This is kind of just Bloom's ode to women, I guess. I mean, on the one hand, we see that he thinks of women in a very, a literally celestial way, holds them up as some kind of other being. And I think part of this has to do with his relationship to Molly, right, his wife, who we learn in the last chapter, well, maybe actually at the end of this chapter, I can't remember, that they have not been intimate with each other in 10 years, and that dry spell, if you want to call it that, started after the death of Rudy, their son. And we learn that Bloom, too, has been unfaithful. And so it's not exactly this just one-sided story of Bloom's this good guy getting cheated on. It's this really complicated relationship of two people that just have lost that connection. So we see in this kind of Bloom's comparing women to the moon, right? He finds them beautiful and intoxicating and complex, inscrutable, right? He holds them up as something other than human, I think, which maybe is why he finds it so hard to talk to his wife about the grief that they've clearly both been struggling through, and their marital issues. It's a really beautiful paragraph. So that's the last quote I had. I think the emotional core of this book is grief. I would say grief. The difficulty in dealing with the things that you need to deal with. Right? Most of this book is Bloom wandering around and trying not to think about the fact that his wife is cheating on him. In some ways, it seems like he'd rather think about his dead son than his wife being unfaithful. And I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier, right? Rudy is this unchangeable image of potential, whereas with his relationship with his wife, there's all this complexity and nuance to deal with, right? To deal with the memory of Rudy, he can be sad and he can imagine the way things would have been or could have been. To deal with the problem of his wife, he would have to speak to her and admit fault, and deal with the 10 years of mistakes that they've probably both made. So I think most of the book is about grief and the ways in which we avoid it. It's so difficult. It's such a dense, like I said, obtuse book, right? Some people call this book pretentious. I mean, a lot of classic literature gets that label, but this book especially seems to make people mad because of its notorious impenetrability and difficulty. And I think it's valid to not like it, obviously, but I think all the kind of tricks that he pulls, Joyce pulls in writing the book in all these weird ways, and all the different techniques he employs, all kind of feed into this central message of, or this theme, this idea of grief and of avoidance. And again, the characters are so wonderfully complex, and you hate them sometimes, and you love them, and you feel sorry for them, and there's no beautiful movie moment, right? There's that kind of suggestion of Bloom's and Stephen's father-son, surrogate father-son relationship, and it never really comes to a head. It's very anticlimactic, and we kind of get a resolution to Molly and Leopold's story, but not really. Right at the end, we get Molly's thoughts, and she kind of affirms her desire to be with Bloom, or Leopold. But it's very open. It's it's a wonderful book. But I would only recommend it if you're ready to bash your head against the wall for a while. So yeah, if there are any, again, so much to talk about, if there is anything in it that I didn't touch on and you think would be interesting, I would love to talk more about it in comments or in another video. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got. Thank you for watching, and have a good day. See ya.